Hi, everybody. Welcome to our DAT IQ Weekly Market Update. This is our update for August the 26th. This is episode 353. I'm Dean Croak, market analyst here at DAT, and special guest today, good friend, former employee, work colleague, Anthony Smith, senior economist at Realtor.com. Anthony, great to have you back on the show.
Dean, great to be on. We've been partnered up in many different combinations, and I'm excited about this one, bringing in more housing and construction perspective from Realtor.com.
Yeah, we've just had some housing start data come out. Starts were up in single family, permits down, a little bit of a mixed bag, but we'll look to talk about that a bit later. But Anthony, for those that don't know where you've landed after we worked together at FreightWaves, tell us a bit more about what you're doing at Realtor.com.
Definitely. So I'm a part of an amazing team head up by Danielle Hale, an amazing chief economist over at Realtor.com. As I said, the team is top notch, and each economist kind of has their own niche. I'll be covering the luxury market and looking at what's going on pretty much that top 10% of the housing market. So those trends are a little bit different than the overall housing market, but definitely keeping a pulse on that one as well.
So not where I live then.
Well, one of the more desirable zip codes are going to be in that New England area, so definitely in a hot market.
Yeah, I live in an unusual part of the town where there's a lot of big holiday homes that are in the multi-million-dollar range. It's not us. This is interesting. Looking forward to talking a bit more about that. We'll bring you back in. I'll quickly go through the market update, and then we'll dive into some macroeconomics and maybe weave in some truckload data.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Anthony. So a couple of things we're looking at this week. Spot rates really been flat for the third week. They're within a penny of both the year-to-date average and the 13-week rolling average. Andrew Smith from Circle Logistics had a great take on the market on LinkedIn. He said it feels a lot like 2011 and 2014. He said flat is a thing. Cycles are just wishful thinking. That got my attention because we've been seeing a very flat freight market lacking noticeable changes in market cycle direction for the last 3 years now. Of course, brake check week is this week, followed by Labor Day next week, so all that could change temporarily as capacity tightens in the next couple of weeks. US imports surged in July ahead of the now delayed 8/12 tariff extension on Chinese imports. Volumes were the highest this year in July, record 2.73 million TEU. In fact, exceeding July volumes even during the pandemic, which was quite the achievement. Volumes are up 8% year to date, 15% month over month. And Port of Los Angeles actually broke a 117-year-old record, handled 1 million TEUs in July, as importers rushed to beat Chinese tariffs being imposed, or talking about being imposed. Cash shipments came out. Tim Denoyer spoke about them last week. At his conference, freight volumes down in July. The multimodal index fell about 1.8% from June, down almost 7% year over year. It's the largest drop in the shipments index we've seen since January. It's also the third month of volume declines. Tim said that tariffs have impacted shipments as earlier demand pull forwards are being realised, though goods prices remain relatively stable. Jason Miller's truckload ton mile index came out recently. It also revealed a weakening of seasonal adjusted freight demand. Activity was down about 0.2%, still up 1% year over year, though. Jason said year over year gains were primarily driven by sectors like wood manufacturing, petroleum, and machinery wholesaling, which are, of course, less reliant on dry van freight. Of course, brake check week is underway. We typically see a 6 to 7% weekly drop in equipment posts as a result of this week. I expect capacity to tighten as carriers take time off. We'll report more on that next week on our show. This week's market update, of course, will be out this evening at dat.com/market update. Right, let's have a look at our load to truck ratio. Last week, our load posts were up 2% and about 26% higher than this time last year. Load to truck ratio ended the week mostly unchanged at 5.93. In the refrigerated market, volumes remain mostly flat, but about 35% higher than last year. We're seeing a lot more activity in the spot market this year, but very closely aligned with where we'd see volumes in load posts for week 34 going back 7 or 8 years. So even though it's higher year over year, it's very consistent with what we'd normally expect. Load to truck ratio ended last week up slightly at 10.91. In flatbed, load post volumes held steady last week for the third week. but up substantially compared to last year. Load to truck ratio climbed to 21.05. Having a look at our year-over-year look at spot rates on the charts there, you can see that not a lot of change as the chart moves towards the end of the year. Line haul rates kept flat last week, averaging $1.65. That's 4 cents a mile higher than last year and about 7 cents a mile higher than in 2023. Remember, these are line haul rates excluding fuel. Top 50 lanes remained unchanged also. These are the top 50 lanes based on volume of loads moved. They were steady at $1.99. And in the 13 key Midwest states, which represents almost half of our national load volume, loads moved, also an indicator of future national trends, spot rates are up a penny on flat volume. Carriers in those states earned an average of $1.87 per mile. That's 22 cents a mile higher than the national 7-day rolling average of $1.65. In the refrigerated market, rates remain stable for the second week, holding at just over $1.97 excluding fuel. That's identical to where they were last year and in 2023, sort of underlining where Andrew Smith thought the market was, which was flat and lacking any cyclicality. Stability comes as late summer and early fall produce begins to take effect. Capacity in the Northwest, though, did change last week. It tightened, rates up 6 cents a mile. Carriers are averaging $1.85 out of the Pacific Northwest, slightly below the national average. Spokane, a lot of activity there. Of course, that's where a lot of the fall produce is starting to come from. Rates up 9 cents a mile to $1.83. There was a 3% increase in loads moved out of the Pacific Northwest last week for carriers. Having a look at flatbed, the national average, excluding fuel, held steady also at 203. It's been at that level for the last 3 weeks. That's about a 9 cent per mile increase over the same week last year and about 13 cents a mile higher than 2023. Specifically in Houston, spot rates for outbound Texas loads are up 3 cents a mile last week to 232. Carriers transporting loads from Houston to Dallas earned an average of 278. That's an 8 cent per mile week over week increase on Houston to Dallas. One of the other lanes we look at in flatbed is Houston to Lubbock in the Permian Basin, where about half of the drilling rigs are located. They decreased about 6 cents a mile last week to 245. There's been about a 35% reduction in load volume on that lane. That's also consistent with the decrease in drilling activity. Oil and gas rigs fell to 538 last week, according to Baker Hughes. That's the 15th week of declines. Baker Hughes reports that the overall rig count is down 47 rigs year over year. That represents an 8% decrease from this time last year. That directly affects the flatbed spot market, given a lot of the drill pipe and casing come out of the Houston freight market. All right, let's have a quick look at our forecast before we bring Anthony back in. Remember, these are our short-term forecasts out 35 days. The blue line is the historical average for 7-day rates as submitted by carriers. The ratecast is in green. That's forecasting where rates will be out 35 days. Of course, it more heavily weights longer-term seasonal trends. And the ratecast green line is bound by yellow and red higher and lower error bands. So let's start with dry van. Ratecast is expecting rates up 4 cents a mile to September 26. So it sees a little bit of strengthening towards the end of the month and then starting to fall off. Rates will be at that point, according to Ratecast, at $1.69. That'll be about 9 cents a mile higher than last year. I really do think that's a bit optimistic, but who knows? We're about to see Brake Check Week enter into uncharted territories with all the talk about English language proficiency and non-domicile CDL holders. Who knows where that lands? And of course, Labor Day is next week when carriers do traditionally take time off. In the refrigerated market, spot rates up a penny to September 26th, landing at about $1.99 according to Ratecast. That'll be about 3 cents a mile higher than where they were last year. Low case has rates up 4, high case up 6. So relatively strong outlook for the reefer market. Flatbed, though, down a penny. No surprise there. That's normally what we see out to the end of September before flatbed rates start to rise as we get deeper into hurricane season. Ratecasts expect rates on 9/26 to be about $2.02. That will be about 8 cents a mile higher than where they were last year. Low case has rates down 4. High case has rates up 2. All right, let's bring Anthony back in. Anthony, easy question for you. Where do you think the freight market recovery is likely to, do you think it's likely to happen before the second quarter of next year?
Yeah, that just an easy layup on that one.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, from what it seems like, it's been such a resilient overall macro economy.
Right.
And so I'm curious to kind of see how it all plays out, of course, and where DAT is kind of feeling out. But it's been a very,
Mm,
very impressive macroeconomy. I know going back to last year, there was so much concerns of when is this recession going to happen? How is it going
mm,
to roll out? How deep is it going to be? How long is it going to last? So it's really impressive to see how the macroeconomy is going, but also how so many other sectors of the economy are going through different cycles at the same time.
right. Right. Yeah, I was talking to Basker Majors last week from Susquehanna, and he's a very astute market analyst. He said at the start of the year that he didn't think a freight recovery was likely till 2026. That was in January, before all of the tariff stuff started. So he had a pretty good read on the market. Turns out that's pretty accurate, that 2026 might be a bounce back year. But of course, that remains uncertain. There's a lot of indicators that tell us that we are on the precipice of a recession. Whether that means the extension of the current freight recession or not, whether a freight recession is even going to happen. One thing you and I have seen is how resilient this economy is and how resilient the American consumer is. You can never underestimate them. So, what do you think might, if the freight market does recover, what would be some of the key things you would watch to say that we're on the right path?
Definitely. I think in analyzing it, I think taking a step back and looking at what some policies might really kind of play out, looking at really how imports have been impacted by tariff, looming. And so we saw, of course, pull forward end products when there was that first talks of potential tariffs. And then there was so much uncertainty, still is a lot of uncertainty with what certain agreements will be with other countries and how local markets will react. But I think the main thing is going to hold true is that whether or not these tariffs stay in place, it's going to take time to really ramp up local production. So
Mm,
that import activity is going to be a mainstay for quite some time. So I
mm,
think one of the first things that we see is going to be on that policy side. And then we might not know how the true implications are really going to play out until maybe years down the line, until some of this infrastructure has been put in place or maybe hasn't been put in
yeah.
place.
Did you get a chance to catch the Chairman Powell's comments in Colorado last week?
Yeah, so reviewing that one, I think we get a bit of a potential hint towards a potential
Mm,
cut coming up here in September.
yep.
And I think if that is the case, we will definitely see a significant reaction from most markets.
Mm. Now, significant reaction means a boost in confidence, a boost in activity, more capital investment, more homes being built. Is that what you sort of translate that to mean?
I think so when it comes to housing, every little bit helps. And
Mm,
so even if it's just a small percentage point down, that's going to open up a breadth of opportunities for a lot of potential home buyers that are still sitting on the sideline. I
mm,
think there is still that mindset, even though I think the rates have been held at this level for so long. I think
mm,
there's going to be that mindset of, you know, okay, maybe we're in a down cycle for these rates, and I'll just wait until they keep moving a little bit lower. But I don't think that's quite guaranteed to just say, okay, we're just going to be moving downward over the next few meetings. But I do think that that
mm.
likelihood is heightened over this next meeting here.
Yeah. Um, we're hauling, if I extrapolate single family housing data, we're hauling something like around, 32,000 fewer loads of freight compared to last year. That's sort of fairly rough back of the envelope math, but we're definitely seeing less volume as it relates to freight, because the housing market is a really good indicator of freight demand. Can you sort of pass out um, single family permits, which of course you and I have articulated as a very strong indicator of flatbed demand because they're the most freight intensive of the construction types. Can you sort of pass out for our viewers? Permits were down about 8% year over year, but starts were up 9% year over year. On one hand, permits are kind of a more pessimistic view of demand as it relates to builders, yet the number of starts was up. Can you separate those two for us?
Definitely. I think that goes into two different parts, and it's interesting. I feel like there's this duality, of course, within transportation, and it kind of also goes into housing when you go into buyers and sellers, or shippers and carriers and things like that, and where that power remains. And within housing, I think there is a bit of a more pessimistic overall view for builders right now,
Mm,
currently in the housing market. And so I think when we're looking at that, that's going to be the tone that we're parsing it through.
right.
And so I think when we're looking at, is there housing demand? It's yes. It's just not at the current price points. It's not at the current mortgage rates. And so when we're looking at that, I think there is that demand. When we're looking at what's going on with that permit activity, I think that's going to be more so pushed towards affordability and potential pessimistic
Right.
tone right now overall for builders.
Yeah, builders, I think, are still struggling with labour, labour supply. So I think one of the things I read last week was they had rushed to complete a lot of homes, which kind of boosted some of the numbers. I wondered whether that was temporary. So we had just Dustin Jalbert, a good friend, on the show a little while ago, and he was talking about the different parts of the housing market. One was I think it was remodeling. I think it's the remodeling part of the market as opposed to brand new homes. And I think he said that was as high as 40% of demand is for the remodeling side of the industry. Do you have any data to sort of give us a sense of whether people are doing more remodeling as they kind of lock in these low mortgage rates that they've got?
I don't have any data myself, but I think that makes a ton of sense from data that I've looked at in the past,
Mm,
especially when I was in the building products material space.
mm,
It makes a lot of sense when you're looking at folks that maybe are in homes that have that lock-in effect,
mm,
of course, of because that's still very much in play of individuals that have locked in a very low mortgage rate and maybe would be in the market for selling, but still don't want to trade in their um,
right,
historically low mortgage rate
right,
for a much higher one.
yeah,
So it makes sense that more folks would look to
right,
remodel and continue to stay where they are and make their old home feel new again,
mm,
rather than look to buy a new home.
mm,
But one of the interesting things that we did see was that there are, I believe it's, I want to get this number right. I believe it's well over 60% of households have uh, mortgage rates under under 6%. So
mm,
there's a significant amount of folks out there that are sitting under on these lower mortgage rates overall.
mm. Mm. Yeah, I think the bottom line is it doesn't matter what data point we look at, we're just seeing less things being manufactured, less things being built, made, that's sort of resulting in this lower trend of freight volume year over year. I don't know that volumes are down as low as our colleagues at FreightWaves sort of mentioned last week. I think they said they were down 15% year over year. I'm not sure they're down that much, but we're certainly seeing less volume. But of course, that's being exacerbated by excess capacity that's still lingering in the market. On the demand front, so interest rates is one thing we've covered. What else would you look at as a macroeconomist that might be something we should watch as it relates to the freight market improving? Like, is it manufacturing? Is it the ISM PMI, the ISM PMI? Like, what would be a couple of data points that you'd suggest our viewers focus on?
Definitely, I think, of course, keeping a finger on the pulse in our monthly reports over at Realtor.com is definitely going to be a big one.
Mm,
But I think when you're looking at more from a consumer standpoint, the home purchasing sentiment index is also going to be a nice one to kind of keep your eye on from Fannie Mae,
mm,
understanding where sentiments lie and overall consumers' confidence and consumer sentiment. So, of course, the Conference Board puts out a nice index regularly to kind of get a feel for what people are going through or what the consensus is from consumers.
right.
So I think there is quite a bit to kind of, if you want to get a feel for what's going on for consumers, consumer confidence is one. Of course, I have to say that Realtor.com is going to put out any of
Yeah.
those great insights for housing. But when you look at the greater macroeconomy,
Yeah.
those are going to be some of the first ones I look at, of course, when it comes to, of course, policy play as
Yeah.
well. Jerome Powell is going to have that dual mandate. So, looking at what's going on with the labor market, looking at what's going on with inflation levels
Mm,
is also going to be really, I think, intuitive of what to expect moving forward from interest rate policy.
yeah.
So, if we see some softer employment numbers, if we see that inflation is starting to ease off a little bit, I think that's when you can kind of start to anticipate that, okay, there may be some wiggle room.
Right.
But with everything, there's always those nuances. So if
Mm,
you were to ask a labor economist about the overall labor economy, you might get an answer of there's that duality of there are some segments that are incredibly strong and resilient right now, while maybe some of the parts of the tech sector are
right.
going to be going through a little bit more fluctuations.
Right. You mentioned the Fannie Mae Home Purchasing Sentiment Index, the HPSI, that you and I were both involved in. For those that may recall, we did find, Anthony and I both found a very strong correlation between the index and flatbed spot rates, which was fascinating. Anthony, I've just had a quick look at it. It's July, the HPSI is at 71.8. People, if you're, for those watching, want to get hold of this data, it's at fanniemae.com. It's the Fannie Mae Home Purchasing Sentiment Index. Anthony, it's about the same as it was last year. If we exclude the wild gyrations of the pandemic, it's back to about where it was in September of 2012. But of course, when you and I were working together, it was on a bit of a tear. It was getting close to 100 before the pandemic started, but we've never really got back there. Consumer confidence has been taking a battery. Tell me what you like about this index the most.
Dave, I think one of the things I really like about it is going to be about around the aspect of how folks feel about job security.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be such a significant point when you're looking at whether or not someone's going to make a home purchase or whether someone's going to have a big ticket
Right.
purchase down the line.
Yeah.
Do they feel confident in their employment, going forward over the next 12 months? Do they think their income's going to go up or down over the next 12 months? And so that's one of the aspects I really enjoy from it, because big ticket purchases aren't going to happen when consumers aren't feeling stable, aren't feeling confident. And I think that one speaks volumes, not just for housing, but for other industries as well.
Mm. It's for those that don't know, I think this is a really good index because I think, Anthony, is there 8 sub indices, of which one of them has to do with job security and wages and spending. But I think it's a really good index.
Definitely, yeah. It's one that I think is going to be multifaceted. So for folks that are looking for within housing and outside of housing and just general consumer sentiment, I think that's definitely a good one to watch.
On the consumer spending front, what would you suggest is a good indicator of how people are feeling generally about the likelihood to just continue buying things?
Yeah, so revolving credit's always going to be interesting to watch. As you kind of alluded to earlier on, is never count out the American consumer. Even
Mm,
if times are looking a little bit rough, Americans consumers will
mm,
find a way to continue to make some of those purchases,
yeah.
whether or not they're going to be, leveraging credit for the better.
Mm,
So that's going to be one to watch. I think looking at how consumers are leveraging credit, but also looking at whether or not they are defaulting on
mm,
anything. So
mm,
right now, I don't think we see anything that's startling right now on the defaults
mm.
that folks aren't paying off. There are some quarterly numbers that had some upward movement overall, but right now, I think that will be a good one to watch, or a key figure to watch overall.
Auto loan delinquency rates, is that sort of part of that general delinquency rate comment you make?
Definitely. So looking at those
Yeah.
delinquency rates, and I really do think that sometimes there are these diverting signals where consumers say that they aren't confident, aren't really planning on spending, and then you see that
Mm,
so
right.
much is still being put on those cards.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of comes from, of course, that lifestyle creep. And I think a lot of that happened throughout the pandemic as well, where
Mm,
you had this infusion of stimulus
mm,
funds,
mm,
and so many folks started spending, and then those funds dried up. But now they're accustomed to certain things.
yeah.
Maybe it's food delivery more often, or maybe certain
Right.
experiences, things like that. So
Yeah.
some of those things stick, and some folks get accustomed to that and don't want to trade down or go back to what it was before.
Yeah.
And so I think there are some of those lifestyle creeps, that saying of once a luxury is experienced, it becomes a necessity. I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of necessities that were previously luxuries that folks aren't willing to kind of part with just yet.
Mm. Pass that out a little bit because I think there's a bit of a nuance here when we talk about the consumer. You touched on it earlier about you focus on the top 10% of home values, I think you said. But there's a big split, right, between consumers. Some are affected more so by rising prices. Others seem to be more insulated and tend to spend more, like regardless. So can you sort of break that down a little bit? Because I think that drives different aspects of the freight market differently.
Definitely. So when you're looking at pandemic, post-pandemic, and now those consumers that are going to be, just fine are going to be some of those higher income earners
Mm,
that aren't going to be they're going to be impacted by inflation, but not going to be impacted in such a way that a
mm,
lot of folks that are maybe just below that median or right at median are going to be impacted, where they're going to have to make
mm,
more day-to-day decisions on what are going to be some necessities or what are going to be some nice to haves. And so I think those that are going to be at the higher income bracket
mm,
were able to weather the pandemic and inflation storm a
mm.
lot better
Right.
than some of those lower income earners. And
Mm,
so when you're looking at even the tippy top of those ultra luxury home buyers, you're talking about homes that are going to be over 6.5, 7, $10 million,
mm,
and a significant portion of them are going to be buying those straight cash. And
mm.
so that's going to be something that a lot of folks aren't going to be considering
Right.
if they're looking at buying a home at $475,000.
Yeah. What size of the market does that represent in terms of the maybe the number of homes that are sold each year? Like what's the breakdown there? Obviously, a
Definitely.
small
So
percentage.
yeah, so at that point you're getting into within 1% of when you get into that 99th percentile, you're getting into like the very end of that distribution curve. And
Mm,
so it represents such a small part of the market. And so it gets to a point where it's a bit beyond the data, just because it has to be, you would like to have as many examples as possible before you make a certain call. But
mm,
then when you're looking at certain zip codes, for example, we did a study at the most expensive zip codes in the country not too long ago. We had to restrict it to at least 30 and up, because if you don't, there's so many zips that are going to be, drastically priced, but there's
mm.
only maybe 5 listings. But even when you're looking at 30, that's very few listings for a certain zip code, but these are substantial property, substantial listings
You
overall,
mean 30 million and up?
or like 30 listings
Oh,
overall for a
30
certain zip
listings.
code.
Okay,
But within something like Fisher Island
got
and
it.
Miami, 30
Right,
million is going to be very regular for a lot of those homes.
right. Wow, there's some pretty big numbers there. Tell me a little bit about Realtor.com and what you do there. I'm kind of fascinated by what
Definitely.
you guys do.
So yeah, Realtor.com is an amazing organization partnering with real estate agents and opening up to consumers as well. So folks can look on the platform, get an idea, whether not just for purchasing a home, but also on the rental side as well.
Mm,
We put out an amazing amount of data every single day, covering all major macroeconomic releases for the most part. They're going to have to deal with housing and construction, and even those a little bit outside of it as well, when looking at employment and things like that that are going to feed into housing construction. And as I mentioned, each economist is going to have a bit of a niche that they focus on, whether that's going to be new construction, housing affordability, rentals, myself being looking at luxury or the overall macro market,
mhm.
and reporting to some amazing leadership with Danielle Hell, and really being able to digest the housing market from so many different angles really gives us an advantage to use our proprietary data
Mm.
to really make sure that we have our finger on the pulse and are considering all types of scenarios down the line.
Is it, do you have sort of a membership or a subscription-based model, or is some of this sort of free to consumers?
Definitely free to consumers. There are different platforms and models for those agents looking to use. Realtor.com does a great job for um, real estate agents that are looking to get more qualified leads. Realtor.com is one of the best in the industry. I would say the best in the industry
Mm,
for providing those
yeah,
qualified leads for those real estate agents looking to
mm,
grow their book of business and
right,
kind of continue to move forward and prosper.
yeah. You and I are also talking next week in Schaumburg, Illinois, at the Cotting and Butler insurance event. I think we've got about 600 people attending. It's going to be quite the show. What sort of things do you think you might touch on during our session?
Definitely. So I think going to be some aspects around the general overall housing market, and how that ties into freight.
Mm,
Also looking to dive into some of my supply chain roots with talking around some of the flatbed implications as well, because I always felt like that was such a crucial
mm,
market to watch, that
mm.
canary in the coal mine, if you will, to kind of show what types of large construction or manufacturing trends are happening that can really dive or drive
Mm,
downstream impacts as well.
yeah. All right. So that'll kind of bring us up to the end of the show. How can people get in contact with you if they'd like to learn more or get you to speak at one of their events?
Definitely. So, as always, I'm always available on LinkedIn. Always have to be a bit better about checking it and logging on.
Yeah.
But Smith at realtor.com is going to be a great way to reach out to me and get all your housing updates.
Good man. All right. Well, we'll get back to you, those listening, about the conference next week. We'll give you an update on our next show. We're also on Radio Nemo. Don't forget to tune into Road Gang Radio every day, 7 a.m. Central on iHeartRadio, Facebook, and YouTube Live. Chris Kaplis, the Freight Vine podcast, he's talking to Vishal Jadhav. He's a product director at Blue Yonder. They're talking about the use of large language models in the supply chain. Of course, Anthony and I are going to be at the Cotting and Butler event next week. Make sure you set up alerts for the show. Don't forget, Labor Day cargo thefts are destined to spike next week. Second quarter of this year, thefts are already up 13% year over year, 10% increase from the first quarter to the second quarter. Of course, hotspots will always be California, Illinois, and Texas. Food and bev, household goods, things that don't require an internet activation are always high on the list. So make sure you keep track of those trailers as drivers take time off this weekend. With that, another show's in the books. Thanks for watching. Be safe. Be nice to everyone. We'll see you next week at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific.